Hello, everybody. I'm Roy Steinberg. I'm the producing artistic director at Cape May Stage, and I'm so grateful that you could join us. You know, one of the perks of my job is every so often I get to talk with some really interesting people, and the man I'm about to introduce you to is one of my favorites. James Reynolds he won the Emmy Award for Best Actor. He also was nominated many times for the Emmy Award. He also was nominated for the NAACP I think it was called the Image Award, and I think I was actually with you when you went to that ceremony. We'll talk about that. And he's also an important Kansian. He is on a list of people from Kansas who are important citizens of that state. He's a veteran of the U.S. Army. He was in Vietnam, and he wrote about that. He's a journalist. Would you join me in welcoming Jim Reynolds? Hello, Jim.
Well, hello. Make sure I have the right button pushed, and I do.
Push the button.
We rehearsed.
I'm so sorry. I'm so glad.
Marine Corps, by the way, I have to tell you, it's the Marine Corps. Can't confuse the Army and the Marine Corps.
Marine Corps. That's even better. And I know I'm not a member of I'm not a veteran, but I know people who are. That's a very important distinction.
Oh yes. Marines never want to be confused with anyone else.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I mean this sincerely. Thank you for your service in Vietnam. That was really, it's an extraordinary. I know that's an extraordinary time in your life, and you wrote about it, and as a journalist there as well, right?
Well, I was a journalist there. That's primarily what I did. It encompassed a lot of different duties, but yeah, that was the early sort of forming part of my life. I was just a young boy, a young man, at that time, 18, 19. And so those were crucial years.
And to this day, I know that you do USO tours and you're still very involved in all of that.
Yeah, we had been for quite a while, less so now, because obviously not a lot of us are doing much of anything at this moment. But yes, I did with the USO and Armed Forces Entertainment for well over 10 years. I realize we're celebrating the 19 years since 9/11. And I made my first trip for the USO that winter, actually about 2 months after 9/11. We ended up going to, my son and I went to Kuwait to visit the troops and be in that area. And turns out then I did it for many years, and then eventually worked for the Veterans Administration as well as their spokesperson for volunteerism and also hospitalized vets.
Wow. Well, it's been 10 years since you were here in Cape May.
Yes.
Doing I Too Am America. And you were also among the very first guest directors. You directed Top Dog, Underdog.
Right. Yes.
It was a very controversial play. One of our great successes, I must say, thanks to you and thanks to your brilliant work and the amazing cast that you had, one of whom was your son and also Steve Sager. What did we do to make you stay away for 10 years?
Well, I'm so sorry, but I would come back in a second. It just so happens that, and I thank you tremendously for not forgetting and asking periodically if I could come back and do certain things, but the timing just never worked out.
Yeah.
I've got this other job that seems to have kept me away for a little while,
I'll say,
and so the timing
I
never
just
worked
wanted
out.
to mention also among the other awards that you've won, and I don't know if you remember this, but when we went to the NAACP, is it called the Image Award?
The Image Award,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. And Stevie Wonder did an impromptu concert, and
Yes.
whoever the lady was who was running it at the time said, "Oh, now Stevie's gonna play, and we'll never get out of here." And I'm thinking, great.
Well, the Image Award is not renowned for being right on time, and so that's always an issue. But Stevie sort of trails us. He's been to our theater a couple of times, and then his drummer is a friend of ours as well. So we're always aware of Stevie wherever he is.
Well, you have another award, which is that you are in the Guinness Book of World Records as the longest running a black actor who has had the longest running role in history.
Yeah, in television. Now, not in the Guinness book, because they don't do awards based on ethnicity or nationality or that sort of thing. But it's a very well documented that I have portrayed this character, Abe Carver, longer than any actor, African American actors, portrayed any character on television, nighttime or daytime, in the history of TV, which will probably stand, I suspect.
I would think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there are very few shows anymore, soap operas. I mean, anymore,
yes, that's simply you're not going to get 200 episodes anymore
yeah.
of anything, and if anything, it'll be just the opposite. If you get a good 8-episode run on something, you're good.
Right, exactly. I mean, I think I still have a piece of clothing from when I was there that said the 40th anniversary. So I think it was like.
I'm sure. Well, this would be 55. I think the show started in 1965.
Wow.
So this November will be 55 years for the show. That's extraordinary. And realizing that I think General Hospital is a little bit older, maybe a year or two. And that's it.
It was Guiding Light, which is the oldest. That began in 1938 on radio.
Yes, on radio.
And then
on radio.
Too on television.
Yeah. I love listening to podcasts, and I listen to quite a few of them. But I started years ago listening to old radio shows, and one of the few things I'm too young for is that's very few things. In the early 1960s was sort of the end of radio drama. So every once in a while, my grandmother listened to the radio quite a little bit, and we lived with her. So every now and then an old radio show would come in. You know, there weren't enough at that time to kind of adopt a favorite, but they were there, and I would hear them. And so later on, when I was able to go out and buy cassette tapes and then CDs of old radio shows, I started listening to them. And now, of course, with podcasts, they become, it's back, which is very interesting. The same concept, exactly the same concept. And very well produced.
That's the real world ever, what's the word? Does it align with your character in terms of storylines? I mean, when I was on days, I think you were captain of the police department.
Could have been either that or the commissioner, one or the other.
You became commissioner, and then you became mayor.
Mayor.
Right. And
yes.
Right now, you're probably president, and in between being blind and other things.
Governorship may come in. I don't know. Depends on,
you'd be a great governor. Your character's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, that might come in between.
Actually, in a more serious note, just out of curiosity, with all the things that are happening right now, Black Lives Matter and Black Theater United and so forth, do any of those issues, are they ever introduced in I don't mean in a political way, but just in even in terms of storytelling?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, when I won my Emmy, it was for a storyline that dovetailed with something that is extremely current today, and was about young Black men getting shot, unarmed Black men getting shot by the police. And in that particular story, it happened to be Abe's son, Theo, who was doing something suspicious, but unarmed, and he was shot and almost killed by a policeman. Turned out to be an old friend of his that he grew up with, and that was the nature of that story and how it split the community of Salem. It was an excellent story, something that we don't do that often. That's current, that dovetails with what's happening in the real world, and well told. And I thought, because it's a soap opera, it was invested in families, the Horton family, as you know, the key family of the show, and then the Carver family, and the way it went back and forth, their enmity for each other that went back and forth, all coming off of this shooting and this really unwarranted shooting. And it was a very rich story. I was very appreciative of it. So that was one of those stories that you get to sink your teeth in, that's current. I loved the fact that it was something that people could relate to. And here we are 2 years later and still in the midst of that moment.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I wonder if, one of the executive producers is a dear friend of mine and a friend of yours, I'm presuming.
Yes.
Also a man of color.
Yeah, absolutely.
If that in any way was influenced, or at least brought that storyline to the fore.
Well, I think so. Albert was very supportive during that run, and Ron Calabardi, who's our head writer, that was his first story. So when I met him, he told me that this was the story that he wanted to introduce himself to the day's audience with, and so I was clearly very appreciative of that, and excited by it, and couldn't wait to actually see what this story would do. And we didn't get into great detail at that moment, but when I did hear the details of it, I was just over the moon about the possibilities of the story. And of course, as you say, Albert, being a man of color, understood the nuances of it, and that helped a great deal. Particularly helped a great deal, I think, with the rest of the cast in the show, and it helped bring people on board with a deeper understanding than they may have had otherwise.
Yeah.
And so we were there to explain it, the two of us, essentially, not to explain how they would do their characters or play the scenes, but what is there? What's the feeling? What's the history? And how you bring this message across for the audience, so the audience can do the same thing. They can look at each other and go, well, I didn't think of it that way. That wasn't something that occurred to me. And how people react in their own human ways.
That is the beauty of I think of daytime television, that can be told in real time. And if I'm not being too personal, you have a son in real life. We know that because he was here at Cape May Stage.
Yeah, absolutely, with Top Dog Underdog.
Yeah, and I presume at some point you must have had the talk, with
we do.
Yeah,
we did have the talk.
Stopped by police, or
and we've had the talk several times. We had a variety of talks, and which is one of those things that when you are a parent of color, and by that, when people say that, I mean a parent that is Black or Latino or Native American and Asian, you have to have these conversations, because if you don't, then your children are kind of being sent out in the world unprepared for an eventuality that might not happen to them if they're a white child, and very likely, at least not in that way. And so we've had a lot of conversations over the years about race, and it's vitally important, because there's an understanding that has to happen there. And yes, what to do, how to do it. This is situational, and even then, understanding that what I'm saying may not work, might not apply at that moment. Hopefully it does, because the aim, at least my aim, was to diffuse the situation as much as possible. and hopefully have it move to something else. And so, yes, you have to have that conversation, and we've all had that experience. I've had that experience. I spent a night in the Glendale jail, guilty of nothing, other than being out at 4 a.m. in the morning in
Oh my
Glendale.
God, I never knew that.
Yeah.
Well, you have a face that's recognizable.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, I'll share this with you. Teo, who also performed at Cape May Stage, who plays Tony on Days of Our Lives, tells a story of being in Israel, and the security are trained to remember faces of terrorists, of people who are dangerous. And guy comes up to him very quietly, says, "Sir, would you come with me, please?" And he's taken to a room, and he says, "That face, I was trained to remember that face. I know that face." And his colleague said, "No, that's Tony, you idiot, from Days of Our Lives."
That's great. That's great. Yeah. Well, that's always in the back of your mind. And I do remember that. I remember that night vividly, actually. But, and it did go through my mind for a second. I hate to say this, but it did go through my mind for a second. Say, wait a minute, are you sure you know who you have here? And I didn't say that, which was wise of me.
Sure.
So I never said that throughout the entire evening. But it's a very, very helpless feeling. It's a very scary. I knew I hadn't done anything, so it wasn't fear in the way that they were going to throw me in jail and lock away the key. But the officer was a little arrogant, and it didn't necessarily treat me in a bad way.
No, right.
But it was just this kind of air of suspicion, and I hope I didn't catch you with anything, and all of that sort of thing. I carried a little bag with me, which I still do, and iPad and phone and all that stuff, which didn't exist then, but I had other things in there. And I remember him looking in the bag and then looking up to me with this little grin on his face, and I hope I don't find anything in here. And I'm going, well, no, I don't think you will, but I hope not to.
Amazing. Well, one of the things that you and I and Teo, in fact, share is we are among the few in daytime television who have a love for theater and have performed and directed in theater. And I was wondering if you might just talk a little bit about how that's different as a performer and as a director. I know you haven't directed television, I don't think.
I haven't directed television. I've flirted with the idea, but I haven't done it.
Yeah, but you have directed, obviously, theater.
And
And let's just talk about that. How is that different?
Well, I won't say it's substantially different because as an actor, because ultimately acting is acting. You have to modulate your performance for one rather than the other because you don't have to reach the back row in television or in film. And your approach to the character is somewhat the same, but once again, different in that you're shooting things out of sequence. You have to make sure that there's a certain continuity in your performance, and that the limited rehearsal time becomes a big issue because you have to adjust each day. When you're as an actor, when you're at home learning the lines for the role, you're learning the lines, you're learning the characters, you're looking at the scenes, deciding what you want to do in the scene and how it's going to play. That changes the morning you go in to shoot. And it changes for a variety of reasons. It changes because the director has something in mind. Their shots may demand that you do something a little bit different than you'd been rehearsing for days, actually. The other actors are approaching it perhaps in a way that you hadn't anticipated. And so you have to adjust your performance for that. Of course, hopefully they're doing the same thing. And so there are all these unexpected occurrences, whereas on stage, it's steadier. You're rehearsing for a period of time. You've got 4 weeks or 6 weeks or however long that rehearsal period may be. And so you're always working through based on that you have the time to experiment. You have the time to try something new. You know the people a little bit better. You have a continuity with the director, because I may have had it in television, I may have had a different director the day before. And it may be a similar scene or the same scene or certainly the same story. On stage, you have this ongoing relationship. Same thing with actors. You know where the other actors are going. And so there are really major differences that I think demand a certain discipline that a lot of us, as directors and actors, I think in particular, that a lot of us don't have. And so I find back in the early days of television, once again, back in the 50s and 60s when this all started, I wasn't anywhere near this business at that time. I was learning to tie my shoes, but stage actors were the backbone of daytime television.
Right.
As you know, most of the shows were set in New York, and a lot of the actors that appeared, and it was live TV for a great deal of it, and I know about that from talking to actors who were around during those days. And so stage actors were the backbone of daytime television in those days. And it became a kind of a perfect second job to go in the day, half-hour shows largely, sometimes 15 minutes. So it didn't require as much time either in preparation or in shooting. And you go down, and then from the stories I hear, people sometimes left and went home after dress rehearsal, thinking they'd done the show. And so phone calls were going out before the cell phone was invented, trying to track down so-and-so. Where are they? They go on in a minute. So that kind of thing. So we have kind of moved full circle, and now there's a larger pool to pick from as far as actors and that sort of thing. And so watching actors who come in, some of whom have been around, some have been big stars for years, but they've never done theater. They've never done daytime TV, and they're overwhelmed.
I have found that the East Coast, having worked on the East Coast for a long time, there is a different sensibility, because to this day, you have actors who may be appearing on Broadway that night who come in as a day player. They'll come in for a non-contract role for a time. And in some cases, they'll be, rather, as you say, rather big stars.
Yes. And no idea. That shocked me, actually, when I first started. I had Days was the first daytime drama I had ever done, and everything else, and film and TV and episodic TV and all of that, but not daytime TV. And I was surprised that these big names would come on the show, usually in a recurring basis, and be very, very nervous and be really kind of lost. And that shocked me. I just left a nighttime show on CBS that I had been on, and the premise of that show was you take people back in time to visit a moment in their life. So I was used to working with people of names. They'd come on every week, and I'd be the person basically that shepherd them through this experience. But that was what they were used to.
Yeah.
That's, they were used to television. A lot of them were TV stars, some were film stars, but they were used to that, single camera, all of that. And then, but then to see this experience on daytime, and to see it in an entirely different way. And these folks were fish out of water.
Oh, sure. I mean, I remember as a young actor, I was on Another World, an NBC show that doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
And nobody even told me, where, they just said, go to hair and makeup. And, well, where is that? And,
yes.
Hair and makeup. And then next thing you know, you're in 2 seconds, somebody like me gives you a dry rehearsal, and you're on camera and you're doing it.
Yes.
I still remember at one point actually saying to my castmate, this is the opposite of everything I've ever learned. And he said, well, it's like being shot out of a cannon, but there's a net at the end and they catch you.
Sometimes.
Yeah,
well, with cannon, there's a net.
Yeah.
Daytime TV, not so much.
Right. I know at one point, after I was directing Marion Seldes, who was a day player on One Life to Live. And nobody knew who she was. And as a director, you don't get told who anybody is until they walk into rehearsal. So I knew who all the contract players were, but in walks Marion Seldes, who, for those of you who are tuning in, Marianne Seldes was in Death Trap on Broadway forever, and she taught at Juilliard for years, and she was a renowned theater star. And when she walked in, I said, "Oh my gosh, Miss Seldes," and she said, "You know who I am?" I said, "Well, yes, of course I do. I'm so honored, to have you." Well, of course, nobody else knew who she was. Nobody
Yes,
could care.
yes.
But there really is those two worlds.
Oh, those two worlds. And and we've had a couple of people on the show who were very well known and had series and, were legitimate stars at some point.
Sure.
And of course, the young kids had no idea, and some of the older folks had no idea who they were. And it hurt them. They a couple of them that I knew and would walk up much as you did and say, "Oh, I love your work and thank you for doing that." And they would go, "But no one knows who I am." And I said, "Well, they're a little younger than they will, they will in time. I'll make sure they know."
Yeah, I think it is generational because
Yeah.
I know from having hung out with you for a bit that you know actors who are before your time.
Yes.
You know who Ralph
Yes.
Richardson is and John Gielgud
Absolutely.
and all those guys, as do I. But I think lots of times the younger generation don't.
They don't.
Yeah.
They don't, which is understandable. I mean, it actually has taken me this long in life almost to kind of understand that. When we grew up, we had fewer entertainment choices. For a lot of my young life, there were 3 TV networks. And so in essence, 3 channels.
Right.
Some areas there were more, but most of the country was 3, maybe 4 or 5 channels, and that was it. And you had the movies that would come out, not nearly as many. There was no streaming. There was no cable, none of that. And news events would happen, and you know who they are. These days, there are so many celebrities in the world. I mean, it is incredible how many people are out there. I mean, I was looking at the new line of one of our guilty pleasures that we had watched. Is Dancing with the Stars, and there are a couple people on there we actually know of. But I couldn't believe that Carol Baskin, I don't know if you watched Tiger King or not, who may have killed her husband or maybe not.
Right.
I don't know. But she's on Dancing with the Stars. I'm thinking, this is such a bizarre world we live in now, that somebody who had notorious fame is now considered a celebrity to the point of being celebrated.
Just reading about the casting director of that show, of Dancing with the Stars, and they were talking about these zeitgeist of popular culture. So you have people who are actors and artists, but then you also have people who are, as you say, notorious for being perhaps a criminal or but hey, they can still move, right? So they can
still move. They can do it. Somebody's going to watch them just to see if they kill somebody in the audience or whatever morbid curiosity.
Well, you have Spicer, wasn't who was on
John Spicer, and so was Tom DeLay, who used to be for a brief moment Speaker of the House and had to resign in disgrace. And but that's only one example. I mean, I just saw that next season is going to be the last season of the Kardashians.
Yes.
Well, there is no talent there to speak of. There's just they created a brand. I mean, I think it's brilliantly done.
Brilliant.
I have nothing bad to say about the Kardashians because, as far as I know, they've never done anything bad.
Right.
They're
just famous for being famous.
Famous for being famous. Famous for being famous, and that's always existed to a certain degree. But today we have so many, and some are legitimate, and some aren't. But back when we were younger, they earned the celebrity title, if you want to give celebrity a title, legitimately by working at it.
Now I know in your youth, were quite an athlete, and
used to be.
Yeah, well, it's been a while since I've seen you, but you still had some moves on the basketball court. The last
had a few. Had a few.
And
yes.
Have raised money for charity. Is that still going on, or?
No, we haven't done that now for quite a while. It's been now we're probably moving over 15 years ago. I was. We did that. We had an annual speaking of celebrity, annual celebrity basketball game that would take place in either in Pasadena or in South Pasadena.
Mhm.
And we started as a way to raise money for the local YMCA in Pasadena. And we did that for a number of years, for about 10 years. And then we moved to raising money for the South Pasadena athletic programs. And we did that for a number of years. And we would have a celebrity basketball game that drew people from all over the world, which was great. And I'm always grateful to all my castmates who show up, and people from the crew that played as well, and was wonderful. And sometimes we would play other shows. Sometimes we'd play the teachers. That got a little rough, so we decided let's leave this behind for a while. They always seem to have a point to prove that involved disfigurement of the actors.
Oh no, that's not good.
That was not a good thing.
Yeah.
So that. So we moved away from that, but then, the interest grew so large that I ultimately ended up just using our show, and we'd split people up and do what I thought would be fairly even teams, and it was great. It was wonderful. Well over $200,000 over the years that we raised in one way or another, and it was great fun, and we did it for a long time. And I'm sorry we're not doing it anymore. I really do miss that. But I coached my wife's team for a while.
I mean, these days it would be difficult. First of all, the people that sit close to each other in the audience,
yes,
or for that matter, even to play ball, because even the NBA can't do certain things that they used to be able to do.
Exactly. Yeah, it would be well. Certainly this year it would be much more difficult than any time in the past. But it just became a little harder to do, and permissions and insurance, all the things we used to kind of slide past became much more difficult to slide past, and so we had to stop doing it. But on an individual basis, we were doing things. My wife had a team that once a week would meet at the high school, and I'd coach them and play a little bit, and still go out and play recreationally, and now and I love the game. In fact, we were even talking about going out in the driveway and shooting around, which I do. But over the years, the knees and the wrists and other things have made it much more difficult. But I have to work out and try to find ways of doing it. And basketball was always a fun way of doing it.
And you played football as well, right?
Yes, when I was just part of the knee issue. I played football when I was young and in high school, and a little bit in college, and even a little bit in the Marine Corps. They had a at that point when I was in, they actually had a pretty ongoing basketball and football program for certain bases, if your base was large enough. And of course, in Hawaii, which was my first duty station, there are a lot of service people there, so the different bases, we'd play Pearl Harbor, for instance, or Schofield Barracks, and occasionally come to the U.S. and play like the University of San Francisco or San Diego, UCSD, and so that was great fun. And I did that for a little while, and the Army always had really good teams because the draft was still on in those days, so they actually had NBA players.
Wow!
At that point,
amazing.
So it was something.
So lead me through how you got from being in the Marine Corps and you become an actor, and like, for example, I Too Am America. What prompted you? That was something you actually created. I mean, you put together pieces already existing material.
Right.
What was the inspiration for that? What was the catalyst that made you want to do that?
Well, it's a good question. When I became I was one of those people. I think my life has been lived on by good fortune. I don't know why. It's not. I'm certainly not Mother Teresa. I haven't done that much good in my life, but for some reason things seem to work out well. And I was always a dreamer, a reader, and reading tends to prompt a lot of dreaming, and which I did both. Read a lot, dreamed a lot. And so I really wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. I knew I wanted to write. That was an early desire, was to write and become a writer. And the Marine Corps was the initial step on that, because I did become a journalist in the Marine Corps. That was my, they called it information services. That was my military occupation specialty. And so later when I went to college with the intention of going to law school, nothing about acting, I met a good friend of mine who's one of my better friends to this day. And we were talking about things to do, places to meet girls, basically. And he said, I'm a theater major. Come on, we're auditioning for a play tonight. Come on over. And auditioned for the play. And I said, well, you know, I did some high school plays, but I thought about it. But yeah, sure, I'll go on. He said, yeah, that's, you know, it's a great place to meet girls. You'll love it. And so I did. I got cast in the play. I don't know, but miracle on miracle. And it was kismet. That was it. You know, I saw her across the room, acting in this case, and fell in love immediately. So as time progressed, and I was looking for things to do, and wanted to do something that I could hold all the reins in my hands. And I actually produced and directed the second bit of acting that I did. I went out and got some one acts and got some people to do them, and called up the school board and booked my little company into touring the schools with the one acts. That was the second time I'd ever been on stage. So I knew I could probably figure out how to put a play together. And so with I Too Am America, I love history, and I've always loved Black history. I've always felt that there's so little known about it, certainly at that time, much more now, that people didn't understand it. Black people didn't know about it. White people didn't know about it. People just did not understand Black history and how important it was to the American story. And so I thought, well, let's do something that would bring this to people and give the audiences something to think about and to talk about. And it was right around the first time I think I saw Hal Holbrook do his Mark Twain.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I don't have to worry about getting a cast. With that, you know, I could do it. I could direct it myself. And so I was going down all these different, fairly logical, or what I thought was logical, and started to read more and more. And I started to see excerpts of people throughout history. And I realized that I could do a character, but then I'm limited. I'm just telling one story, or maybe bits and pieces of one story. And so I thought, let's pull this together. Let's do some poetry. Let's do let's do characters. Let's do their lives. Let them sit down and tell the story like the old African griot used to do. Let's move from scene to scene and keep it going. Let's break it up by music. Music is always a great way to transition and to keep the audience entertained when the lights go down or go out. And all of these things that I'm very fortunate, somehow were floating around in the air, and I was able to sort of catch hold of as an extremely inexperienced person. And so I Too Am America was born with that. I had a different title in the beginning, and I don't remember, but the Langston Hughes poem, I Too Am America, I Too Sing America, was one of the pieces that I was using. And I thought, this really speaks to what I want to do. I want to share the American story. This isn't an American story. And that was largely my message. And I wanted to share that. So I Too Am America was born. And in thinking of doing this with you, I had thought of doing pieces of I Too Am America that hopefully we will do in the future. And the opening poem is of that is Let America Be America Again, which is another Langston Hughes poem, so timely and so perfect for today, that I thought, well, this piece, I thought then, as I do now, this piece lives. Yeah. It lives on. So that's the genesis. That's the genesis of that.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I was so moved when you did it. I remember there was one particular anecdote you told, which still resonates with me, which was about your own family. It was about, maybe you could relate some of that to us about Your
The
grandparents.
family, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of stories, and I do encourage people to find out their family stories. And I'm upset with myself that I didn't know more or learn more. A lot of these things were things I picked up as a child, listening to conversations going on around me. You know, when my mother and father divorced, we moved to a little town in Kansas called Oskaloosa, and lived with my grandparents for the majority of my life. So, you know, they were definitely 19th century people, and so you know, we were basically quiet when we were around. But you pick up information when you're a kid and you're just listening. So a lot of the stories about the family are the things I heard. And whenever I would ask my grandmother or grandfather, he never said much anything, but or even my mother, they would just reply, "Well, why do you want to know about that old stuff?" So I knew I wasn't going to get a lot of direct information, but I ended up getting some, and my mother became more vocal as time went on. But that house, which I still own, my brother lives in it now in Oskaloosa. The kitchen of that house was the cabin that my family lived in for many, many years before they started to add on to the house. And as the story goes, they left slavery in Missouri. And I've been there a number of times. It's in Clay County, not too far from where Jesse James was, the same vicinity, the same area. And they had been slaves there when the Civil War had broken out. And they knew the Civil War was going on. They knew all this had happened, but their lives was pretty much the same. They get up in the morning, they do their work, and you know, that routine that went over and over and over again. Yeah. And eventually, the people that owned the place left, just kind of disappeared. They had no idea. There was no word to any of the slaves, whether they worked in the house or worked out in the fields. There was no word. The family had just packed up and disappeared. Now, I suspect there was more to it than that. I suspect somebody saw them load something on a wagon and they pulled out. But as the story was translated to me, they were just gone. And eventually, after a few days, the slaves actually stayed there. No place for them to go. They had no money, nothing to do, really weren't sure about what was going on in the outside world. And eventually some Union troops came by and let them know that the war had been going on for quite a while, that they were free to go, and they could go anywhere they want. And they had asked, "Where are you going?" And they said, "Well, we're going to Kansas." And eventually, I think it was Fort Riley that they were going to. Fort Leavenworth, which is in Kansas, wasn't very far from them, but they were going past that. And they said, "You know, you can come along with us for a while, and you might want to for your protection." And so that's what happened. And they said, "Go in the house, and whatever's there, you can take." And my mother told me that the woman who was my great grandmother only went in the house and basically took the corset that belonged to the woman that owned the place. That's all she took, was her corset. That was it. I'm sure there were things laying around, but she must have admired that corset for years. And so she took the corset. That's all she took with her. And they got in the wagon and started to head out. And they came eventually to Oskaloosa. And there was there's a creek outside of town, a big overhanging rock out there. And my brother and I actually used to play out there when we were kids. We go out there and we play cowboys and in war and all that. It was a perfect kind of place for a kid to run out in the woods and play and do all that. And they spent their first couple nights there under that rock. And then the officer of the troop came to them and said, "Well, we're moving on. You're welcome to join us, you know, or stay if you want to stay. I will help you, help try to get you some shelter and a place to work and all of that." So he did, and they acquired this land where we still live. Right. And so that first cabin was built. That's where everybody lived. It's not as big as my office where I am now, anywhere near. It's about 2/3 of the size of that. And over the years, they added rooms on, so eventually became this kind of ranch-style home. And I do remember my grandfather saying that the word was in town that every time somebody got a piano, they would put on a new room, because people that don't remember, pianos came in big plywood boxes. So, and the plywood would usually be thrown away or somebody would use it. So we would build a new room onto the house whenever somebody in town got a piano. So that was largely it. So that's how that came to be, and that's how we came to be in Oskaloosa, Kansas.
Wow, amazing. So, like everybody, you've been, I imagine, have been quarantined and shuttered in your home. What have you been doing? Have you been have you been doing stuff online or just kind of reading or?
Yes, all the above. I've been Zooming a lot of Zooming. Yes, all the above. Well, we have a couple other business things that go on. We have I had mentioned our theater earlier, but our theater is part of an office building. We have 25 tenants in that building. So one of the things that Lisa, my wife, specifically has been working on has been trying to keep our tenants happy and keep them with us, because they're wonderful people. A lot have been with us for years and years and years. And so we wanted to work it out so everybody can stay, even though it's hard. It's difficult. It's difficult for us. We've got to pay the mortgage. It's difficult for them. They've got their rent and their own mortgages. So we came up with different ways of working with different people, and you have to have, and the answers have to be different for everybody. You've got, you want to keep them. So some people can afford to just completely do it as they did with no change. Others needed some kind of way of operating so they could stay in. And one thing I have learned, that we have learned actually, is that writers love to have a quiet place, especially when their children are home and they have to do homeschooling. So we've had we've only lost 3 people over this time, even though we've had to accommodate a number of people. But writers have come in right away. We've had a long list, actually. We actually have a list of people looking for a place to rent, which surprises me. But so that's something that keeps us busy. But then there are other things. And then I got a call from a young man early on. I knew about this from a few months before, but I thought it had disappeared like so many things in Hollywood, as you know. But anyway, they were doing a digital series, and that had been written for me. And they decided that they wanted to do it. They had wanted to do it during this time. Obviously, with COVID, that wasn't possible. But they had reached a point, and it's fully funded. They had raised all the money. Everything was there. But they called and said, "Well, we think we'll start rehearsing," which was a godsend. It was, it was just really wonderful to have 3 times a week get together on Zoom, mostly people I didn't know, and rehearse. That was so great and so much fun to do. And, I looked forward to that. That was a wonderful thing to do. And then, we had been in touch. Some other people had been in touch about various things. I was quite honored to be called by the Emmy, the Academy, to make a special presentation for Al Freeman Jr. during the Emmys in June. That was very nice. That actually got me out of the house, but it was still a distanced kind of thing. And so we've actually been very busy. We've had a monthly poker game with old friends for about 15 years, and somebody just do it online and do it virtually. So we do that. Now we do it twice a month because we have more time. And so, it's interesting how your time fills, but it's still the same thing. It's still, it's great stretches of nothing to do, a lot of reading. I read constantly anyway. You give me 10 minutes, I'm going to read. Sure. And a lot of reading, binging, as a lot of people do, walking the dog. Sure. I have to tell you a dog story which has nothing to do, but Lisa was out walking the dog one day, and she saw a woman who she's seen before. We know the names of the pets. We have no idea what our neighbors' names are, but the pets we know. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, she was walking the dog, but this time she was carrying the dog. And she said, why are you carrying the dog? She said, the dog is so tired of me walking it
Huh?
that it won't go.
That's very funny.
So I think that's happening a lot these days.
I have to say, your wife Lisa is one of the great actors.
Yes, she
She
is.
performed for us. You know, she did A Woman of No Importance.
Yeah, The Woman of Independent Means.
Independent Means. I mean, yeah,
Yeah. The other one's a novel. You must have read it.
yeah.
Or not a novel, but a historic.
Short, yeah, and
Yeah.
the writer. In fact, I think I met the writer as well.
Yes, Elizabeth Forsythe Haley.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, we had dinner together, as I recall.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. A wonderful writer. Her husband's Oliver Haley.
Right.
Is a tremendous playwright.
Of course. Yeah.
And I can't for the life of me remember right now. Memory is a casualty of the quarantine, by the way. They were producers on a soap many years ago. I think in the late '60s in New York for a while.
It might have been Ryan's Hope or something like that.
It may have been. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, great.
They're lovely, lovely people, and Betsy's been a great supporter of ours. And we met her. I was invited to give a speech at a gathering of authors. And one of the things I love in life, and this part of my life, is having gotten to know authors and writers, since I was always in love with books and always in love with writers. And so this is a group of authors. We happened to be seated at the table where Betsy was, and we became friends instantly. And I had no idea. And I knew about the book, The Woman with Independent Means, which was a bestseller for many years and played on Broadway for a long time. So we became friends. She and Lisa became friends. And then when we got the theater, Betsy went on our board, and we couldn't have been happier.
Well, you know, after you were in Cape May, several years later, I, with another wonderful playwright named Sean Fisher, created something called the National Playwright Symposium. And every May, we bring Pulitzer Prize and Tony Award-winning playwrights like Terrence McNally and David Ives, people like that, to come to Cape May and work with 20 mid-career writers, which is a great. I'm so thankful, so grateful that we were able to do that, and that these amazing people come every year.
Yes.
So, you know,
that's wonderful.
Yeah. You know, I realize now, just talking to you again after all this time, why when I first met you, I thought, I like that guy. We have very similar, we have very similar background. We both like to read. We both were looking at law at one point and ended up going to theater because there were more girls there. And
we had that discussion. I remember having that conversation.
Yeah. In fact, I'm trying to remember if it was your car or my car, but when I literally first was at Burbank, there was some kind of party, and I was asked to go, and they asked me who I wanted to go with, and I said you, and then we got lost.
I remember that as well. Yeah, I think it was a party of some sort that was part of some event or something.
Yeah.
No, I remember that. But we had a great time talking, and you know, I got a good idea of what your background was and where you come from.
You know, it's an interesting thing. I think when there are certain people, and then Albert is another example, where if you have a theater background, like for example, when I first started directing on Days, and I was asked who did I want to be my producer, because I was the producer mostly.
Right.
Without hesitation, I said Albert. He was the director at the time, and I just knew that because he could just say it's Tennessee Williams. I said, got it, and I could go out the note. You know?
Which is wonderful. Yeah.
So
no, go ahead. I was going to say
we have that vocabulary in common.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, which is interesting too, because back when we were talking about the early soaps and the relationship to theater, and one of the things we watch or I watch actually is the old To Tell the Truth. Yeah. The old black and white, and even into the 70s a little bit with the color shows. But it's interesting because those were theater actors. Most of those people were theater actors, and they're talking about Tom Poston doing a play in Portland, or someone doing a play in Florida at some mall or something. But these were important theaters of the time. which sadly don't exist anymore.
Right.
But they weren't, I mean, they bring to mind, you know, a small little theater somewhere. But the truth of the matter was that these were important outlets for actors of quality and stature.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have a Tony on your mantle, and you know, you're going to the Mall Theater in Portland for a month or 2 months to do Waiting for Godot or something. You know, that was an important thing in those days. That was a sign that you were a serious actor. And somewhere along the line, and I think it's a lot of things, it's the rise of television. It's the fact that we don't have as many small theaters around the country as we used to, and there are more entertainment choices.
Right. It always makes me laugh. There's a play which we did called I Hate Hamlet, which is a very cynical play when a guy's a TV actor is going to do a Hamlet, and his agent says, "Why do you want to do a Hamlet? If you do theater, they'll know you're washed up."
That's true. That's true. That was now,
right.
Unless you have a television actor in it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Great.
You've got to have that.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Jim. It's been such a pleasure just to see you again and to talk to you again. Hopefully we can do some more of this down the road.
I'm looking forward to it. I really am. This was just great fun. You know, I knew we were going to have a good time doing it. And, you know, I need to quiz you.
Okay. You quiz me next time. And please give my love to Lisa.
I will.
And
well, I'm so glad to see Marlena. And I assume Lexi's off.
She's a psychologist now. That little girl is now.
That's right. That's right.
And she's a psychologist in Virginia.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's something. That is something. Well, it's always hard when your only one is away a little, and now you can't actually be together, which is.
No. Well, I mean, suppose if we quarantine for a bit, then we can maybe drive there. I mean, it's not that far where we live now.
Yeah, that's true. Well, everybody's sort of planning, you know, whatever they can. Sadly, I think it's going to be a while.
Yeah, I do too.
And I see Dr. Fauci
just
says.
Before we leave, what is your prognosis for the future in terms of theater? Do you think, is it going to be a year or 2 years or 6 months?
I think it will at least be a year. I just read that Dr. Fauci is saying things won't be normal until the end of 2021. Mm-hmm. And I think he's right there. I think as far as people returning to the theater, I suspect a little bit will depend on the sports that are allowing fans in. I was watching a little bit of the football game last night that was in Kansas City, and they had 15,000 fans that were supposed to be socially distanced in groups of 4s and 6s. They were a little closer than that, I thought. They have to figure out a way of enforcing that if they do it. I think you could have that. You won't make money, but at least the theater will be up and running. But I think shows like Hamilton bring theater alive. And I think the fact that the film Hamilton is actually a staged play,
right,
is great for the future of theater.
Yes.
Yeah, because it has such a wide fan base.
Mm-hmm.
It's changed the way we look at theater. Right. Certainly has changed the way we expect casting to go. It's a much wider net. To have a historical drama in which or historical musical, I should say, but in which the characters we're all familiar with. We all know Jefferson and Washington, and all those characters were white men. And yet the audience, which is overwhelmingly white, has bought into it completely.
Right, sure.
So the old argument that you can't cast these people in these roles because the audience won't accept it has gone out the window.
Right. Completely
gone out the window now. You know, and so I feel that the world of theater may be reborn because of that. And I also think because people have to be more creative, and I like what's going on to some cases with Zoom and FaceTime and some of these others, is that people are figuring out a way to do it. They're thinking of ways to do a play, but do it visually in this way. So I think it's unlocked unlocked a form of
Well,
creativity
the
we haven't
one
been at.
thing that I'm grateful for, I mean, I must say, I mean, to be truthful, I so miss the energy of being in the same room with people. You
Yes,
know, uh, just because we have a history, I feel like it's the energy comes through the screen, but
yes,
it's difficult for me. And if I'm being truthful, to be just on a very cool medium of Zoom. But on the other hand, we have done Zoom meetings, readings with actors from literally all over the world. We just did one.
yes.
There was a woman from in the UK. So we had a Royal Shakespeare Company actress and somebody in New York and a guy who was in Brazil, I think. I mean, it was just kind of amazing that we could
I
all
know.
get together.
And all you have to figure out time zones.
That's right.
You know, that's really it. And I think that's it. I've seen, I've seen dance companies. I've watched concerts. I think there was something on. I think the Grammys are going to be on pretty soon, and I think the Rolling Stones had something. And it's hard on Zoom to do those things because you have to coordinate the notes and make sure all of that lines up. And those are not easy to do, but they can be done.
Yeah.
And it's a very creative time for people, and I think you're seeing that. I
Yes.
think and that's a really wonderful thing. And if we can translate that and bring it to theater, I think that really says our future is pretty bright.
Well, that's a nice way to end this
Yeah.
on our bright future. Thank you again, my friend.
Thank you, Roy. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Super. Bye now.
Take care. We'll talk. Bye-bye.